Hi, I'm Cara Natterson.
And I'm Vanessa Kroll-Bennett.
Each week, we dive into the what and how of raising kids through puberty, that roller coaster of physical and emotional shifts for kids and parents alike.
Combining reliable science and relatable parenting strategies, we will all learn about, laugh about, and yes, maybe even cry about adolescence, ours and theirs.
Roger Bennett taught me two things this week. One is that I should use my hands in conversation with him, so I'm going to be doing that while I do this introduction. And two is that the introduction is extraordinarily important when teeing up a guest. But Roger Bennett is married to my co-host Vanessa, and so I am going to read exactly what she wrote so I don't get in the middle of anything. But I'm going to read it with hands. Roger is a #1 New York Times bestselling author of Reborn in the USA, a book about growing up in Liverpool and falling in love with America as a teen. He is co-host of the popular podcast and NBC sports show Men in Blazers. And as I noted, he is also married to Vanessa, who is sitting right next to me.
Hi, babe.
Hello, gorgeous. This is the first time we've ever sat down with microphones in front of us.
It's true.
We should always sit down with microphones.
I know, it might be
us.
like a great aspect to our marriage if we just sat down with headphones and microphones.
There's only one way of finding out.
Settle in, people. Here we go. Roger, I will tell you that I am in the middle of Reborn in the USA. It is really a phenomenal telling of your story. It's hard to put down, except if you really need to go to sleep, which has been my experience the past couple of nights. It's fabulous. Now, as you describe in the book, you consider yourself an American trapped in the body of an Englishman, a Liverpudlian, in the 70s and 80s. Can you describe a little bit the experience of being a teenager in England in general and specifically in Liverpool?
It's a magical city. But back then in the 1980s, it was a dark time for the north of England. You know, the coal mines had shut down in Newcastle, the steel mills in Sheffield, the cotton mills in Manchester. And Liverpool had been the great port city when England had an empire where everything came in and came out, and the city was one of the richest ports in the world in its heyday. But we grew up so far from its heyday. It felt when I was growing up there with unemployment at about 20%, there was a heroin epidemic that swept the city. And it felt like if you could stand on a street corner and stare at the buildings, you could see the city deteriorating before your own eyes. And so in dark situations, you know, Billy Elliot had ballet dancing. If you've seen that movie, it was very much kind of the North in decay that I grew up in. And he had arabesques. He had all kinds of secret skills that I didn't have. And so like many young individuals in times like that, I created an imaginary world, almost an escape. And mine happened to be the United States of America, a land I'd never been to, but came to me in the form of television, music, books, the sports that were broadcast, you know, Heart to Heart, The Love Boat, Miami Vice, Fantasy Island, the John Hughes movies, the music of Run DMC, Tracy Chapman. And I used them to build a different world to the one that I lived in, a world that was filled with hope and possibility and just almost seemed to be lived in color, whereas mine was lived in black and white.
And you had that dream not in isolation, but you and your grandfather very much shared that same love. And so it seems like intergenerationally, it was just reinforced for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing. I was very close to my grandfather, Sam. We named our first son, Samson, after him. So he was deeply connected, but was different enough and didn't feel like he had to replicate the past, which he's not done. And the odd part of it is I was very close to him, and his dad was the one that left Eastern Europe. And the myth of the family is he was headed as a kosher butcher to Chicago, the hog capital of the world, and that he saw the one tall building in the Liverpool skyline when the boat stopped to refuel. pointed at it and was like, I'm here. We're in New York. Everybody off, which everybody didn't get off. I imagine all the other kosher butchers were like, yeah, you're in New York. Go on, off your toddle. And so we ended up almost marooned in the north of England. There's few worse places really in the world to be a kosher butcher. And I was very close. My grandfather, Sam, kept the business going. I grew up watching him. Literally, I wrote about this in the first chapter, Fist. I still don't understand to this day how that tells you whether the cow is good meat or bad meat, but he'd like genuinely stick his fist right up the cow's anus and he'd go to his sister and he's like, that's a good cow. That's a good cow, that is. Yes. And I was very close to him and he'd talk. He was obsessed with America. He'd fly over here when you had to like take a tiny jet, land it in Iceland and then land it in Greenland, then land it off Canada to refuel. And he'd go to Miami, go to New York, go to Chicago, go to Vegas, he'd come back with tales, magical tales, all these tchotchkes. And when he was particularly pissed off with Liverpool, he'd take, and I now have it on my desk, he'd take this cheap plastic Statue of Liberty off his fireplace and he'd lift it up and he'd go, Rog, we should have lived there. We should have lived there. So it's always kind of flowed in my veins. And a weird part of this is that I'm mostly the gentlemen in my life that I'm mostly close with. Most of them are also super close with their grandparents. It's like a incredible formative relationship. And it was definitely that way for me.
So you were an adolescent in a city where you felt other because you didn't feel like you belonged in the place you lived. And then adolescence itself, the definition of adolescence in some ways is feeling other than everyone else. And I want to read a quote from the book specifically about what it felt like to go through puberty in Liverpool in the 1980s. And you say, it was a cruel empire now populated by two distinct classes, boys who had, quote, been through the changes and those of us who had not. It was easy to tell the difference. You refer to the group of boys who had not yet gone through the changes, aka puberty, and I want to get back to that and ask you if you ever heard the word puberty during your own experiences of puberty. You refer to that group as the eunuchs. But as you say in the book, membership as a eunuch was not a permanent state. And it was, quote, bewildering to see one fellow eunuch after another break ranks and transform into men. So for those who don't speak Roger E's as fluently as I do, essentially you were a late bloomer, and not just a late bloomer, possibly the latest of the late bloomers, or in the sort of lower 10th percentile, would that be an accurate characterization?
I can name 3 people who were later than me.
You know exactly who they were.
Yeah, I know exactly who they are. I hope they're listening.
I'm not going to ask you to name them because I know you totally would. So there you are. You're marooned on an island where you don't feel like you belong. Then you're marooned in a school where slowly everyone else moves to the better island, right? With the Mai Tais and the sunshine. You're still left on the island with the eunuchs. What does that feel like? What did it feel like to sit there in the locker room on the side bench and watch boy after boy abandon you as you stayed on the eunuch bench?
Felt awesome. I mean, you should, the school. So it was like being a triple out. To be Jewish in a heavily Catholic city was an outsider. To be so essentially, my dad was a judge, so we were middle class in a very working class city, a proudly working, fantastically working class city. When we were double outsiders, and the fact that we went to this school, the last bastion of like colonial Englishness in a city that had long given up on all of that crap, Liverpool College. I mean, that made us triple outsiders. It was a ridiculous school. It was like Grey Gardens. We're inside. The teachers, most of whom had been teaching since like genuinely for the First World War, still believed that England had an empire and that children should be seen and not heard. And so it's important context to know that, and I think American readers are quite appalled and fascinated by it. But all the English interviews have done with the beatings, like we were beaten all day, all the time. It was normal to be savagely beaten by a teacher, and you'd come home bleeding. And your parents would be like, oh, you're naughty today, son.
My parents are aghast. They read it and they were like, oh my God, poor Roger.
So you just be mean, and you think, oh, son, be you naughty again? What did you do? And you'd be like, you'd have like lashes all over your butt cheeks. But so that's context for this. So that it was a fairly severe place already. So it was an austere place. It was a severe place. It was a place that believed, as I do, in sports for kids, but it believed in sports for kids in a slightly demonic fashion, which I'd kind of detail. And we played sports a lot, and it was a massive nightmare that, to answer your question, it was something, even when I wasn't playing sports, I was thinking about playing sports with dread. And a lot of the dread about playing sports was the changing. I mean, not just the changing, you'd have to get, and the teachers patrolled, you had to get totally naked for reasons. Another thing Americans are fascinated by is like the teachers made sure you were properly naked. Like you couldn't wear your underpants under your game shorts. Nope, they had to go off. And they'd check in. You'd have to show them, like when you walked out, they'd show me. And you'd have to like show them you weren't. It was a terrible sin to wear underpants with your sports shorts. So it was all, the trauma was the changing rooms, which were just a Lord of the Flies savage place. Which I think are depicted with a certain horror and a certain hilarity. But the sports also was terrifying. I mean, it was a very wonderfully physical game that we played. Rugby, we didn't play. Everyone wanted to play soccer, football. That was the sport everybody wanted to play. Not at our school. That was for...
You played rugby with no underwear?
We played rugby, yes. We played rugby with no underwear. In the freezing, it would be raining horizontally, and you'd just be standing out there, basically like, why? Why are we doing this? What is going on? Your nipples felt so like frozen that they could just crack off if they were hit wrong. And it was all, and also the rugby was a place where if you had gone through puberty, you could destroy other kids and just let out everything that was repressed in school. There's a lot of repression. England, if repression was a Olympic event, I think we'd be like ping pong to the Chinese. We were gold medal, Olympics after Olympics, and a lot of that repression came out in rugby. The teachers encouraged it. You know, they only were annoyed at kids if they missed an opportunity to maim another kid, to lay one on another kid, and so if you'd gone through puberty, you had the ability to do that, and if you hadn't, you were more the target. So the whole thing was, it was hilarious trauma, and to go through it, to answer your question, it was something that I thought about the whole time. And that the thing about the eunuchs really was that we were all in it together. And to begin with, you were like in the majority, and there was just a couple of kids walking around with the towels around their necks, and just like, wow, what is that? And then suddenly,
and by that you mean
just a huge knob, just a monster cock, just like, and they'd walk around, tell around the net, and the teacher would be like, hello there, Kay, goat cock. They'd announce it. Teachers would love it. They high five, you're with us now. And we had a teacher who just announced the status of everybody. I mean, I write about it in the book.
I have that quote right here.
You know, you'd go in the shower and you just hear him be like, oh, nice little bit of fluff. Nice bit of fluff there. And then I'd walk past and he'd go, Bennett, Hitler's deformed micro penis, but very loud.
That's a pedagogical choice there that I hope is not being repeated in current years. Can you imagine?
I mean, so you have this announcer situation going on before and after rugby with no underwear.
Yeah.
But did you have health education? Did you have sex ed? Were there books around? Did you know, you're a very bright guy. I think you could probably infer you were going to switch teams at some point and be welcomed into.
It took a lot longer though than was comfortable. And it wasn't like I was in the middle. I mean, I was here. I should add as a detail that I didn't really make clear in the book that I was moved up a year. So everybody was at least 12 months older than me.
So screwed.
So like early on, they were like, oh, he's a bright little one. He likes the poems. Let's move him up. So I did get moved up when I was 5, 6, like too early to really know what the hell it was. But what it meant was like most kids were at least 12 months older than me. So it wasn't just that I was a late bloomer. I was just like, it was like a Doogie Howser situation.
Well, I mean, you know, the Doogie Howser reference is exactly right. And it has driven a whole generation of parents to choose to redshirt their kids and make sure their kids will not be physically the last just by chronological age, to the point where now in any given grade in the US, you could have a swing of about 18, 19 months between the youngest kid and the oldest kid. And everyone's sort of sees the bright side of having the older kids for a lot of the reasons you described. And there are a lot of scientists who are starting to look at who's better off because, in America, everyone's competitive parenting to a certain degree, which is very unhealthy. And I hope our generation starts to wash that off. But, is it better to hold them back? Is it better to push them forward? And I think the data is pretty clear that there's no better, right? But what you're describing is something that has driven a lot of parents to make a decision to keep their kids home for an extra year before sending them to school.
What's the data on school beatings being a good thing?
Yeah, that data is clear.
Yeah.
No school beatings.
Lashings are definitely a negative.
Although my older brother, who, grew up here in LA, did come home many days having been whacked by the ruler. And so it was an international phenomenon in the early 70s.
Yeah. There was a good part of all of this. You had to survive. You had to adapt to survive. And I think that when I look back to my personality formation, there's a couple of traits that come out of it. And one is I became quite mouthy quite quick, to survive. You could either just give in completely and just try and push through school, which I didn't. I did. I had a great sense of humor. I was mouthy. I was in class. I was always, I was quite vocal with the teachers. And I knew enough how to push their buttons without just being a complete and utter disruptor and the threat. But I feel like a lot of who I am as a human being actually comes from that moment. Like I didn't have that physicality, I didn't have that body, and I always had to rely on my mouth.
And was that a success strategy then with the other kids? Yes, but even in school, was that a success strategy for you? Or was it more a success strategy with your peer group, and then as you've gotten older, it's become more and more?
I'm a human being that's not very comfortable with the word success.
Sorry, Cara, I forgot to mention success is an unattainable goal that will curse him.
Still blessed with 97% self-loathing. As an Englishman and a Jewish person, I get a double dose.
Yes.
So success is not how I think about it. Are you asking me, was it intentional or was it?
No.
Because it wasn't. It just naturally, it's just who I was. I was small. Everyone was big. There's pictures of me going out to pubs and clubs when I was 15, 16. And it looked like I was going out with 5 dads.
He wore his bar mitzvah suit out in high school. Can you imagine?
It's amazing.
With the sleeves rolled up, though, like Don Johnson.
I think it was a 3-piece suit, actually. It was a 3-piece suit,
yeah,
right?
I ditched the waistcoat was a bit much, but I did. Miami Vice had come out. Don Johnson looked cool. I got my mum to buy me a pair of linen pants. Linen, very practical in Miami, less practical in the middle of the winter in Liverpool. A bus drove past me, splashed me the first time I wore them, and I couldn't get the stains out ever, but I still wore them, the mud stains. So I had them at the pleated linen pants, and I didn't need the jacket. The only jacket I had was my bar mitzvah suit, and I wore it with the sleeves rolled up like he would if he was going on the drugs bust outside of Miami. And I wore them with a pair of women's espadrilles that I purchased myself in my pocket money.
For our American audience, those are espadrilles. Roger has its own pronunciation of espadrilles.
I keep imagining the opening sequence of Sex and the City where she gets splashed by the bus, but you're in white linen pants and a blazer with the arms rolled up.
Yeah, we're very similar.
So no, my question for you is really, being a late bloomer is many people are able to look back and credit certain personality traits that have taken them to good places in their life from that root sort of survival mentality. And so what you're describing, the small club of the last 2.5% or 3% of kids to develop, and it's a hard club to be a member of, that club, that's a unifying theme in that club. And so what I'm wondering is, as you became mouthy and as you developed this personality, was it always helpful to you with, the structure around you, with the adults around you? Or was it more that you wanted to get through to the peers and to the other kids? Because that's so much the push and pull of puberty is you're supposed to please the adults, but really By 12, all you care about is what your peer group thinks.
Yeah,
right?
the English adults, I think, are different than American adults. I love my parents hugely, and I share a lot of commonalities with both of them. But parenting was a bit different back in those days, and we didn't engage on any of this stuff. As a parent, I think communication and communicating with the kids is the most important thing. We're very lucky. I don't think it's something you can command, but our oldest kid from the very beginning was very, very verbal and really loved to articulate feelings and converse.
I know him and he's very verbal.
It's amazing. But you can't, by the way, I don't think you can, I think part of that's nature and part of that is, and we're very lucky that Samson is so remarkably articulate, and that communication is now, the fact that parents keep talking to their kids. There's a line in the book, with my dad who, we didn't talk about anything. You asked me earlier, like what resources did they have? We did have sex education, which was taught twice. It was taught first by a teacher who had suffered a horrific Second World War injury when he had been in a foxhole and a German grenade came in. This is an awful story. A German grenade came in and he had an awful minute to think, what am I going to do? What should I react to? And he had all of his friends there. And so he took off his helmet, put it over the grenade, and his arms, at least one, was blowing off. And he was a very severe man. He has every right to be a very severe man. And I remember as a tiny kid, I first encountered him playing the trombone in the school orchestra, which he played really rigidly with his fake arm. And he was just a very severe human. He hit a lot of kids with his metal ruler. And he gave us our first sex ed class, which consisted largely of him trying to teach us how to, as he put a Johnny on it, lads. He had a ruler between his legs because he couldn't hold it with two arms. And with his one arm that did work, just tried to stick a condom over it. And he'd be like, just always remember, lads, stick a Johnny on it. Very angrily. And that was it.
Was it.
We didn't know what it was and why and where the ruler, whatever that symbolized, was going. But you didn't ask questions.
How old were you?
I would think when that happened, I was about 11 or 12. And there was not a lot of conversation. My parents would not have conversed about any of this stuff. It was not discussed. I chatted a lot about it with my brother. Had an older brother, chatted a lot about, and they talk about, that we found a series of books that my parents had, like many parents. The Joy of Sex was one. There was an amazing book called Advanced. It was an amazing what it was called. I wrote about it in the book, and it's something like Sexual Positions for Advanced Lovers. And they just had black and white book plates of just incredible, the helicopter position. I'm still thinking about that. And I just, wow, it was amazing. And then The Art of Sensual Massage. I actually now own the book.
He stole it from his parents.
I stole it so I could get it right when I was writing about it.
And before you ask, no, he's never used the book in
I don't know if it's that sensual by 2021 status. It was shot in Berkeley, and I think it really worked if you had there was like a lot of wicker and terracotta in the photos. But the
little macrame.
I wrote about it, so that was a real source, mostly because I saw breasts, in that for the first time, and just I was able to, instead of just sneaking looks in the locker room, be like, okay, this is where we're headed. It was like almost like those books, the Art of Sensual Massage was almost like as if someone gave you a map of London. If you, so this is where we're going. Let's read up on our destination. And then the other thing that was deeply informative was pornography. Deeply, deeply informative in a totally retrospectively useless way. But back in that day, it was a great currency to have. But
it was 1970s and 80s pornography. It was
magazines.
Different.
Yeah.
How did you get them?
Kids listening. In the olden days, you'd buy these things called magazines, and most kids had 2 or 3. How you got them was just by fluke. Like you'd be in a hotel, in some city, and you'd I remember once in a hotel, and I don't know what made me do it. I lifted up the mattress of the hotel.
Oh my God.
And I was just bored. And, oh my God, there was a mag under there. So, score, amazing. So they just kind of came to you. You didn't find. Once I persuaded my brother to go into newsagents. There was a newsagent that was known to sell them to kids. They were all on the top row of any newsstand. You could go into any newsstand in Liverpool, and any newsstand in England. Totally normative, and you'd have your woman and home magazine section, you'd have your sports magazines, your cinema, your car aficionado, and if you looked up, there was just 100 porno mags all across the top. So
in plastic? Were they in
no,
plastic?
Why would they be in plastic?
The ones here are in plastic.
I know, that's because it's 2020, whatever it is. No, back then it was just and you'd go in and you'd be like, sir, and you'd see real men go in, they'd always pick up horse racing magazine and then reach quickly up and put the mag behind the. So I took my brother in, and he had 2 or 3, and it's and you learn the letters, you memorize them, these letters, you studied these things, you'd swap them occasionally. There was one kid in class, I didn't put this in the book, it got edited out, but there's one kid in class whose dad ran the anti-porn squad in an area of Liverpool, and he would just bust illegal porn distributors and then sell them on. His son would come in with he made a fortune.
He had a treasure trove.
And the reason why it's so destructive is that, we talk now about the male gaze. When I think back to those magazines, the letters, the narrative, it wasn't the male gaze. It was what male gaze times 1,000. What you learn about women, written but in the voice of women. They were always bizarrely written in the letters. The stories were always written in the voice of women, and what it told you about women was just fantasy times a million, and it was just completely and utterly. Not like now. The difference now is that your kids with the internet can not just access porn, but they can find out that they're really interested in right. Turkish porn with a tiny little dog watching a large man and a whatever, inhale balloons and then smoke cigarettes whilst doing X, Y, and Z. In those days, you took what you could get, but just the POV on it was genuinely startling.
It's funny because, I have this company and we make bras for tweens and teens. And from day one, we have committed to not showing images of girls who are modeling the bras from the front. And it's all to your point of the male gaze and not wanting to sort of recapitulate that. Well, girls have started to send us pictures, beautiful, great, healthy, all these great from the front. And they want to be able to post these pictures. And their point is, it's our narrative and we're writing the story. And it's okay if we're writing the story as opposed to if someone is sort of assuming our voice, whether it's a man or an adult woman or anyone else. And I actually kind of love that about sort of taking ownership of your own story, right?
Fantastic.
It's fantastic.
It's much more important that you take control of your own story than have your voice written by a 57-year-old man who lives outside of Manchester in a damp flat who's hey, all women, I love to do this like all women do. That was always a line they'd use, and you're like, okay, making notes.
Did anyone ever use the word puberty to you?
Apart from you on our first date.
Listen, I just need to know, how much do you know about puberty if this relationship is going to go forward?
Yeah, we had a science teacher, an amazing science teacher, Mrs. Rowley, who would talk about puberty, but it didn't register. It wasn't like I never understood the specifics. I just knew I didn't have it. And everything that was connected to that meant I didn't have, and I lacked that status, that standing, that everything. And so it was not really, it was, I detail it in fairly, truly microscopic detail in the book, which I chose to do because, well, number one, the book, it came out of lockdown and me trying to retrace my steps. And from what, as America had lockdown and the Black Lives Matter summer, the agony and the trauma of it, and then into the election. And I wanted to reconnect to times when America was a beacon of courage and joy and wonder. And so I really took myself back to that time and that place and that feeling. And then I did write, I lost myself to it. I mean, I wrote like a madman in a frenzy. And so it just all came out like I wrote everything. I felt everything again. And also I wanted our kids to read it. I tried to, I'm encouraged by you in general, not in relation to this book, but for our kids to hear our truth and to read our experiences and to be vocal about it. I think as a parent, you often are not vulnerable, and you are your dad. And I thought there was something very healthy in putting it out there when the kids are ready to read it, so that they could read about our weaknesses as well as just our whatever the word strength is.
As Gayle King on CBS This Morning liked to focus on your tiny child penis that was a bald spigot. God bless
Direct quote
from the book, and then via Gayle King. So
God bless Gayle.
You know what you didn't have, right? You've revisited the land of Roger in the 70s and 80s, and kind of the trauma of sitting on the eunuch bench in the changing room. And now fast forward, you've written this book. We're raising 4 kids together. And a lot of the conversation we have with adults is about how do we do things differently? Who are we in this moment, knowing who we were? Who do we want to be? Who do we want to make our kids? How can we do it differently? How can we do it better? And I'm wondering, what are you doing differently? I mean, you talked about communication. I'm wondering, what are you conscious of doing differently as you raise your kids in this new country, in this new culture, and in all of these ways, so that they don't have that kind of trauma, hopefully?
I mean, my kids have American accents, for starters, which is endlessly hilarious to me. And there's not a morning I don't wake up and come down to the breakfast table and like, hey, Dad. And it's like so funny and wonderful. I've like every morning I'm like, oh my God, I have American kids. It's really, it's something that never fails to surprise and delight me. So the differences are just so profound. I wouldn't say there's like one. I've taken one small strategy. I've taken everything and just did one little tweak to it. I mean, there is the line at the end of the book. I mean, I did go through puberty, not to spoiler alert for the audience, but I did ultimately.
I can attest to that.
Did ultimately go through puberty, and then it went a bit wild. The Beastie Boys was faintly audible. License to Ill album was faintly audible all over Britain, and it crashed right at the peak of my adolescence. And our school, which was an all-boys school, as an experiment, suddenly let in 15 girls. Oh my God, those girls is just, it was such an ill-thought-out concept, but we all went bonkers together. And ultimately, my father was quite strict, and as everybody just went off, the world kind of went off its axis, my dad actually yanked me back in a variety of different ways, some quite disciplinarian, to study and to focus. And then at the end of the book, I bizarrely did quite well at school, which surprised me for a variety of different reasons. And the night that my results came out, he was very, very relieved and very, very happy. And he said something to me that I've not forgotten. He said, you need to know this was very hard for me too. He said, I hated every second of this past couple of years. But he said, I had to do it because I'm not your friend, I'm your father. And I do think about that often. It's like very common to try and be your kid's friend. Communication is really key, always being there, always deeply supportive. And that line between trying to understand your values, what you want to impart, and that especially as they get older and they can actually withdraw, you can actually stop caring about the values and actually just start, pandering isn't the right word, but like moving so, and I understand it, urgently towards them, that you forget what you just want that connection. And so there's things I actually do think about that I do carry through. And I think about that line, and I think about my responsibilities as a dad, even within the context of trying to be someone that communicates and deeply connects to the kids.
He might not have been ahead of himself in sex ed, but that was very prescient to say that. And I think in the world of pediatrics, for sure, one of the biggest pieces of advice we give parents is to stop trying to be your child's friend. First of all, they don't want you to be their friend. They want you to be a parent. And doesn't mean you can't have, I mean, I've watched, so Samson was an intern for my company, and we were brainstorming articles for the Puberty portal. And these were articles that were incredibly intense topics. And Vanessa was on a Zoom, and it was Samson and Vanessa and my daughter, Talia, and then a handful of other teenagers, early 20-somethings. And Samson could speak so articulately and so like a peer with Vanessa. He was so honest and so raw, and yet he didn't see her as his friend. He respected her as his mother, and he knew she respected him as her son. And yet it was a very free-flowing conversation. So whatever your dad gave you in that line, you guys have done, I can just tell you. And for any parents who are listening, it is a pearl. It's really an important one to take, which is they want someone to keep them safe and healthy. That's what they want.
I mean, one of the things, Raj, that you've taught me, particularly because we have 3 boys and 1 girl, particularly with the boys who are 18 and 15, is, my temptation is to just go deep every time, to ask every possible question I can and hope for.
She does that with me too.
But what you've taught me is, if you get one question answered, see that as a success and get out quickly. And there's a couple things I really appreciate about that. One is an understanding of what it feels like to be a teenage boy, which Cara and I have never experienced. And so we're sort of trying our best and mostly screwing it up. But 2, also measuring parenting teenage boys as a kind of a long game and building trust and respect by not interrogating them and not sort of forcing them to answer a myriad of questions, but just making a connection and getting out of the conversation. And I really learned, I don't always put it into practice. In fact, I probably rarely put it into practice, but that doesn't mean I don't have the intention of eventually putting it into practice. And it's really the way you respect their privacy while still connecting to them is a really beautiful thing, and something that I think they really appreciate.
There's a part of the book where when I start going out to pubs and clubs in Liverpool when I'm about 15, going out with my grandfather's identification card. So if we were carded, I'd show the bouncer that I was a 73-year-old kosher butcher named Sam Pollock. And so I'd go out, and the first night I went out, my brother took me, I actually ran into him in the city. I was out, and he goes, whatever. He gave me the advice. He goes, whatever Mum and Dad ask you in the morning about what the night was like. I was going to one of the like most actively, slightly insane clubs in Liverpool at the time that Frankie Goes to Hollywood would shoot their videos in. I was going to the pub beforehand that was hilariously simmering. He's like, when Mum and Dad ask you what you did last night, just say to them, we went to the cinema. It was great. And that was, in the morning, we'd sit at the breakfast table, hungover, and my dad, what did you do last night? And we'd be like, went to the cinema. It was great. And he'd be like, what about you, Nigel? Cinema too. Also good. We did that for years. So I do think that whatever you get out of your kid is great. And if you push too far, you won't get it next time. And so I'm always like one question and then just get out and let them do their own version of we went to the cinema.
Vanessa always asks people, when we're talking about their puberty journeys, she often asks, okay, if there was someone who could have come in and said something or done something that might have changed the trajectory, what would that have been? So is there a way that someone could have come in to you in Liverpool as a super late bloomer, in your linen pants with your grandfather's ID? I got the whole thing happening in my head.
Yeah, when I look back on it, I thought a lot about it on the walk down here. And the reality is, there's a lot that's come out of it for me. Like, I don't think a lot about physical. When I came to Chicago for the first time when I was 15, 16, I spent the summer on the beach.
No, you went to the cinema.
Yeah, I went to the. I ended up going to Chicago for a summer, which changed my life, on the North Shore in Glencoe and Highland Park around there, where John Hughes shot all of his movies. I spent a summer there. It was like I'd gone through the looking glass and was the star of my own John Hughes movie. You know, it amazed me the comfort that these American kids had with their bodies, just like the way they walk around. I mean, remember, it was even in the bloody summer, it was most often raining and freezing and damp. I got off the plane and the heater, I couldn't believe you could sustain life with that. I thought it was the propellers cooling down. And then when I realized it wasn't, I panicked. I was like, my lungs need dampness. Where am I going to find dampness here? So I got to the beach where I spent most of the summer, and I was just amazed by these kids just so at ease with their bodies. It was remarkable the way they could slash through the waves with these incredible, I don't know where the hell you train him. I was like doggy paddling after them.
I think that was the last time you went swimming.
I hate water. I don't do water. But I realized also, I don't think a lot about physical stuff. You know, once I'd gone to puberty, once it happened, wow, I could look down and I was in. The trauma just went away. It was like, it was done. I was like, okay, we're doing this. You know,
off the bench.
Still to this day, my arms are not very hairy. You know, I went away started to travel Europe, hitchhike around Europe when I was like 17, 18, and run into America. I remember meeting a ton of Americans and being mouthy and funny, and everyone, I remember, connecting to, there was a lot of women. I was like, I remember one of the Americans going, look at that kid. He's not even got hair on his legs and everybody wants to get with him. And I was like, I was like, I looked down, I was like, oh my God, my legs are not that hairy. I wasn't shaving that often when I was 17. None of that bothered me. I couldn't give two craps. It's just like, I am who I like, and my arms are hilarious. Samson is 6'3", 6'4", massive, enormous kid, still has my arms. He finds it hilarious. He's like, Dad, got your arms. And none of that bothered me. As soon as it happened, I lost, the physical zone just stopped. I was in, it was done, box ticked, and it was like the physical limitation. I was still small. I was still, I didn't have any real sense of self. I had no knowledge what I looked like, whether I was good looking or not. It was all everything from that moment on was just personality and character rather than physical.
And by that
stuff.
moment, you mean a adult-sized penis?
The whole enchilada, baby. Yeah. I mean, to be candid, just the first sight of any hair at all, I was just like, won the World Cup. Let's go. We did it.
One pubic hair. Yeah. I'm in.
No, by the way, I can remember that moment. I remember, and I tried to write it into the book. Just that, I spent a lot of time, because you had to shower after the games. They made you shower. The teachers patrolled and made you shower with cricket bats whacking everyone on the earth. And I just decided I was not going to shower. I couldn't. You came in, you were freezing, you were soaked, you had muddy legs, caked in mud. And to not shower was equivalent, I don't like to be hyperbolic, but breaking out of a prisoner of war camp in the Second World War. They had teachers were on you. There were searchlights everywhere. They were getting you in that bloody shower. I was not going in that shower anymore. It was miserable in there. And they made all the kids who didn't gone to puberty shower in the cold shower. They'd laugh at you. It was awful. So I just pulled on my pants and ran for it. And I remember going home in my muddy-legged pants, and then I'd spend hours with the light trying to persuade myself that I could see the first hair or whatever. But once it happened, and by the way, once it happened, it wasn't like everything happened overnight, but once I got visible something, I was genuinely, it was like liberated. It wasn't then I wasn't then looking at my arms and wondering, where are the hairs? My legs. Once it was done, once that was done, I was just like,
so once you started, you were like, okay,
Everest has been climbed.
So here's what's interesting, because when I first met you, we'd go back to Liverpool, and I have the best mother-in-law in the world, and she would tell me stories about Roger.
Shout out to Val.
Shout out to Valerie Bennett, world's best mother-in-law. And she would say, he would come home with his muddy pants and he'd put them back on the next morning, and it was so disgusting. And the reality is, she didn't know why you'd come home with muddy pants. She didn't know the fear, the shame, the embarrassment, the otherness that you were feeling. She just thought, oh, he's just gross. He's just a mess. He's just all over the place. When really there's those medi pants are symbolic of some really big stuff for you at that time.
Yeah, God love. And I think my mum would probably prefer to think it was just grubby fat legs. She probably would like to know that it was just grubby legs, Mum. It was. Yeah, I mean, there's always something deeper. But that thinking this through, I realized it was just genuinely like a switch that was flipped. It was like being liberated. It was like I never worried how tall would I be? How would I? By the way, Carrie, I would do it. Would I keep my hair? I'd never given a crap about any. And it would have when I first met American kids properly, lived with them. I came over to be the weird, creepy counselor.
The weird English counselor with black socks and jean shorts.
Yeah, all the works, man. Don't take away my jorts. So
They're back.
They have, thank God. Some would say they never went away. So I was the creepy English counselor. And I remember arriving just with my backpack with like 2 pairs of jorts, cut down 501, super cool. I had like 1 pair of sneakers and a couple of t-shirts, whatever. And I arrived to meet the American counselors at some Greyhound bus stop in Maine where we're all being picked up. And they arrived with trunks and trunks and trunks of stuff. And I just had my little backpack. I was like, all right, lads. I was like, what's in the trunks? And first of all, I mean, God, Nike Airs had just come out and they all had about 87 pairs of Nike Airs to wear of every outfit, which was hilarious and fascinating. And then number 2, each of them had a trunk just filled with weights. And we all shared a bunk for the first training for the first week before the kids came. And just the boys' bunk was just, it was not part of English culture at that time. Olivia Newton-John, Let's Get Physical had not yet come out, I don't think. And to watch these guys, they were actually working each other out by what they could lift and how they did it and the pecs and the everything. Didn't even know I had pecs. You know, they'd be like, my lats, I'm working on my lats. I'd be like, do I have lats? I was like, lats, guys. And it just never occurred to me. And I watched them all both try and impress each other and build their own hierarchy. I was just never part of that. Like, I never participated in that and just didn't fit into anything because who gave a crap? It's hilarious.
Is the secret to that your temperament and who you are? Is it having grown up at a time and in a place where it just wasn't discussed? Is it that you were a late bloomer and that you were, arguably just working through and getting by day to day until I love you actually used the word we when you saw the first sign of development. You said we did it, like you and your body together.
You and your micro penis.
It's amazing.
America.
But because I think people who are listening to this, one thing that they may be asking themselves, I know I'm asking myself, is how can I raise a kid who has that sense of priority, that lens on life, right? It's a really very healthy lens to let all the superficial go and really just it's about the person underneath. So, go. How do people do that?
I honestly don't know. That's just a natural. I read a lot. So character was always important because I was obsessed with character. I'd watched a lot of movies as a kid. Character again personality was really important. And I shuffled through the archetypes, the stereotypes, the characters that appealed to me when I was a kid in the book. I mean, the book is a lot. I tried to really mine who I saw and how I adapted my life to try and be like them. And there is a progression. I tried to be Don Johnson and I write in depth about what that was like going on a date, dressing myself up in Liverpool, like Don Johnson, looking dangerous. And then I went to meet the girl at the cinema. I think I was about 13, 14. And I just remember she was tilting. She had a haircut with this special waterfall bangs, which looked amazing, but it meant she had to just tilt her head the whole time and keep it tilted. And so I said to her, I got there and I was like, oh, you look amazing. She had her head tilted and she goes, yeah, you look interesting. And so like the Don Johnson thing was a bit of a disaster. I learned like chiseled cheekbones, you can't just will them into existence. And it was great for him. but it was just not my approach to life. And then I moved through the John Hughes movies. I mean, I think a lot of men who listen to your podcast, some of them will have, like, The Duckman seems so cool, but my God, none of those movies have aged well. But when you watch them again, The Duckman, who was a deeply repressed, pretty repulsive human being, actually, when you actually watch it with today's eyes. But he tried to be, I'm quirky, I'm a character, I'm going to repress my love. Like a lot, when you watch that, it was kind of cool. It reflected who you were. You had a lot of feelings that you wanted to get out. But, you know, as long as you were once the Duckman, always the Duckman, as long as you were wearing offbeat shoes, you could get through stuff. And I realized the Duckman was just the wrong way to, like, I did think about the Duckman for about probably I'd say now a month, but it's probably much longer in reality. And it was Bruce Willis on Moonlighting, a show that's not really discussed that much anymore, but it was groundbreaking in its day. He played a character, David Addison, who was scruffy, was a human mess, was not successful, but he did everything. He did it with his mouth. It was like Run DMC the first time I saw them, the same. He was like, he had a mouth that was a hydrant, and he just said hilarious things, and it got him out of trouble. It got him what he needed when he needed it, saved his life on many occasions, and eventually won him friends and the object of his affection. And that proactive, that not repressed, just saying things, like talking about things, making them real. Found that incredible. Run DMC, the same. These guys who just spat rhymes, spat boasts, and then went after making the real. I found that really a fascinating archetype to follow. And so a lot of it was about character. And then there's clearly some of it that you will encounter with your patients, and you'll be able to tell me afterwards. It's just utterly, it's natural. I don't exist on the physical plane. I like character. I like value. I like that the people I like have a certain set of approach to engaging the world. And I think beauty is on the inside as much as it is the outside. And so that's what I tell my kids.
So, babe,
yeah.
At the end of every puberty podcast, we ask our guest for a practical piece of puberty advice.
You're asking me?
I know it's a
big mistake. But
I mean, I know we do this at the end of every dinner at home. I turn to you and say, Raj, give me a piece of practical puberty advice. But let's pretend for now that we
we're
don't
at
do
dinner
that.
At your house.
And really what we're asking for is, how does your story, does your experience inform not just your current life as an adult, but also how can that story help other people have empathy, compassion, understanding for the kids they're caring for? And you can go last if you want. Cara and I also share a practical piece of advice based on the conversation, but I would love to hear from you. What is that? When people walk away from this episode and they've listened to you laugh and cry and share really personal stuff, what do you want them to know as they go home to their families and take care of their own kids?
I think share really personal stuff. It's really healthy to talk to your kids about ultimately puberty. The processes can be a great one. And I mean, the values that I think are really important in life. I mean, I'm thinking about your last question too. It's like, it carries through not just non-physical stuff, but I also love to encourage the kids to be deeply mediocre and to focus not on like accolades and trying to get into Yale with all of their heart and mind, but to focus on their own character, how they're building up their own character, who they are, how they communicate, how they carry themselves in the world. And so to try and model that, the two things I think are important in life are empathy and tenacity. I think those are deeply important values. And bizarrely, a lot of my own work, even though I'm covering sports, is really going back to those two themes, empathy and tenacity, over and over and over again. And so in the process as a father, really I've tried to usher them through so they emerge from it, the boys in particular, with empathy and tenacity. But I've done that by communicating my own pain and to be honest about it, and to show them that, really to laugh at my my own predicament. I gave a really early chapter. In fact, our second son was the first person to read anything. I gave him the chapter, the puberty chapter. He was really in need of a laugh, really. And I just gave it to him, and he read it, which was a miracle that he read something amazing. And then we talked about it and laughed at it. And it's so bloody universal. And funny enough, the book that I wrote, I found everything in it. It's so particular, and it's such a singular story. Like, I'm a guy that grew up with a Statue of Liberty painted on my bedroom wall in the skyline of Manhattan, and I ended up actually living there. I dreamt of it, and I made that dream real. That's pretty singular. But I've had so many bloody Americans be like, "Oh my God, you dreamt of living in Chicago." I grew up in LA and dreamt I would have given my arm to live in Manchester because I loved the Smiths. And that urge to reinvent yourself, that urge to be what you're not, to live. By the way, everyone who's listening in America, you dodged a bullet not living outside of Manchester, but those urges are deeply universal, and to communicate those things. And then the last thing I'll say is that you've got to talk about all of it with them. And the funniest part of doing it was with Samson, our oldest, when I talked earlier about how I was taught to put a condom on by my teacher with one arm shoving a metal ruler between his legs and just struggling to put a condom over the metal ruler and go, "Boys, put a jolly on it." And so when it came to Samson's turn to start going out to the movies, quote, every weekend, Nessa's like, you got to teach him to put a condom on. And I was like, okay. And I did think about doing the metal ruler thing, but I told him, got him into my bedroom with a big pack of condoms, and I was like, "Son, I'm going to show you how to use this." And he's like, "Okay." I was like, "I'm going to get my knob out and show you how you do it." And he goes, "Dad!" And I was like, "I'm joking. I'm going to do it on your knob. You get your knob out, though." He's like, "Dad!" And then I pulled a banana out from between the bed sheets. I was like, "Okay, I'm joking. Let's do it."
I came home that night and there was like a mangled spermicidal banana on the kitchen counter. I was like, you couldn't throw it out or peel it and eat it. You had to just leave it on the counter.
That's the name of my next book, The Mangled Spermicide Banana.
It's better than the Bennett. Tiny spigot child penis.
It's evidence that the lesson was learned.
So share the stories. Tell the good and the bad. Cara, what's yours?
What I took from this conversation was so much around character. And part of it is that we've really spent a lot of time in the last few days together, and your character, Roger, is so unique and fills a room in all the best ways. It's very, very different from most people who I've come across. And I knew I liked Vanessa from the minute I met her, and now I sort of, I know why. She just, I don't know who's the better half. It's a really great combo. But I say that because your comments about character are very, very moving. And I think the pearl that I'm taking from this is that in order to build our kids' characters, that we talk to them and we engage them in conversation. And if that's not working, then we just put them in front of a television and let them start watching and let them start. I mean, maybe it's Heart to Heart and, and all of those great shows that you outline in the book. And maybe it's just that they find the characters they resonate with. And so screen time, that's what I took from this.
Just not the duck man.
Just not the duck man.
So I guess I'll close with it's less practical puberty advice, although I guess it's fairly practical, which is that all of us are imperfect parents and we all had imperfect parents, but there are still really beautiful, meaningful things that we can learn from our parents and our kids can learn from us, even in our imperfectness. And I think your dad's message that he's not your friend, and that sometimes doing the right thing by your kids is hard and painful and not fun at all, but serves them in the long term. And as parents, it's a real struggle to do that, but it's so important for our kids to be their parents and not their friends. And I will say that I am so lucky to get to parent with you. And I'm so lucky to have watched you write this book and put it in the world, because it's beautiful and meaningful and honest, and I think very life-affirming for people in all of the ways that you share your most honest and deepest truths and stories. So thank you for writing it for our kids and for everybody else out there who feels other and alone and different.
Thank you, babe.
I love you.
I love Cara too.
I love you too.
I don't want Cara to feel left out. By the way, you guys are an amazing partnership. It's really lovely to be with you. So thank you.
Thank you. I feel pretty lucky to have both of you as my partners in different ways.
Thanks so much for listening. You can follow us anywhere you get your podcasts, or check out our Instagram @The Puberty Podcast. If you have questions or stories to share, email us at thepubertypodcast@gmail.com. And for more puberty info, check out myumlaw.com or dynamogirl.com. Bye.